it's Stuart Turner here, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to the Leadership and Lead podcast. And for those of you who've not joined before, just to give you a little bit of context, this is a podcast that's directed at all you business leaders out there. We get a guest on board and delve into their leadership journey and leverage their experiences and learning and take away some practical steps that we can go and incorporate into our daily practice. So in this episode, I'm really delighted to be joined by Brigadier General David Komar. David served over 31 years on active duty in the US Army, and he has recently written a book, Conquer Your Culture, to help senior leaders create an environment where basically everyone loves to go to work. Everyone loves where they work. So thank you, David. Thank you for your time today. Really wonderful to have you here. So I'll just pause there and hand over to you to give us a quick intro and some of those pivotal moments that you've that have got you to where you are today, and then we'll go and delve down into a bit more detail and explore a bit more.
Well, Stuart, thank you very much. When it comes to my culture journey, it really started back when I was still in high school before I graduated and went to college. I worked in a department store, and we had a general manager that was in charge of the entire store, but then we had two assistant managers. One assistant manager was in charge of the part of the store we call soft goods. So think of clothing, domestics, shoes, those types of things. And there was an assistant manager that was in charge of the other half of the store, which we called hard lines. So automotive, home improvement, sporting goods, those types of things. So, but what was amazing to me at that time, and I didn't really understand why it was so, but it was like two completely different stores. And one side, the soft line store, half of the store, people seemed to be, really engaged in what they were doing. They seemed to be in a good mood. You'd see them before work or after work or in the break room. And then you had the side of the store that I worked on, the hardline store side, and it was like there was this ominous dark rain cloud over us the entire time. And I just thought to myself, after working there for a year and a half, how could this be? How could the same store have such a different experience of working there? And so that was really the start of my journey of beginning to study what culture is, how it's important, what its impact is on the performance of the team, and just what it means to both the organization as well as the individual within that organization, and their quality of life and what they're, how they view things. So that was really the start of my looking into culture. And then, as you mentioned, Stuart, after college, I joined the Army, was commissioned as a field artillery officer. And when I was put in charge of my first organization, I realized that even though I wanted to create a great culture in that organization, I really didn't know how to do that. And so I studied, I read everything I could lay my hands on. I watched other organizations and tried to understand why their culture was a certain way, and why ours wasn't, and what I could do to really move our organization's culture from where it is to where I wanted it to get to. So that was really the start of what began now probably about 40-year journey or so, trying to understand culture, trying to identify, most importantly, how do you create that culture?
Is that been the driver for your book, Conquer Your Culture? Is that what you're trying to achieve there?
Absolutely, Stuart. That frustration that I felt not only with that very first organization, but subsequent organizations until I really understood culture better and really started to develop a process to create that great culture. I realized that there's a lot of folks out there that share that same frustration. They want to create a great culture. They know how important it is, not only to the organization itself, as far as productivity, innovation, uh, less turnover, fewer accidents, et cetera. And I mean, the data is extraordinarily powerful that shows when you have a carefully managed culture, how much more productive and profitable your organization is. But really, what's the best thing for the people? Because it's the people that really are the ones that create those great,
Yeah.
whether it's uh, whether it's your profitability, whether it's your innovation, whether it's taking care of your customers, it's the people within the organization that are going to do that. So I, I realized and I discovered over the years that there were a lot of people struggling with that. So what I really wanted to do when I retired was to take what I had learned and what I had applied, not always successfully, that's for sure, uh, but to put it in this book. And again, it's a very practical book. I didn't want to rehash what is already out there in the literature. There's so much great literature out there. So many people have written so eloquently on why culture is important, why we should care. I mean, um, there's there's certainly no shortage of that. But even today, there's not a lot written out there about how to actually do it.
How to enact it. Yeah.
And that was really the motivation behind the book.
Mm.
So it was really to help others not be as frustrated, others to see that, hey, this thing we call culture isn't isn't quite so mystical and ethereal as we might think, but there are actually practical steps that you can take in order to get from where you are to where you want to be within that organization. And there's really 4 steps that I outline in the book
Yeah.
to do that.
And what are the 4 steps that you talked about?
Well, so the first step is, and this won't should come to as a surprise to anyone, but
Yeah.
it's it's the one of the most I think it's probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks for most organizations trying to create great culture. It's defining that culture that you want to build.
Yeah.
What is the goal? Where are we trying to get to? When I interview CEOs and executive directors of large nonprofits and even military or people involved in sports, first question I always ask them is culture important? I've yet to have anyone say no. But then when I get to the next question, I always ask them, so what kind of culture are you trying to build here? Well, that funnel narrows very rapidly. The number of people that have really put in the time, the effort, the resources to define that culture that they're trying to build and describe it is really remarkably low. And if you don't know where you're trying to get to, obviously it becomes very, very problematic in order to get there.
get there.
Yeah, and when I talk about describing that culture, I'm not talking about describing it using very broad terms, platitudes such as, or we want it to be empowering and inclusive, et cetera. Now, I'm talking about what does it look, sound, taste, feel, and smell like to work at your company or to work with your company? What is the experience that your employees are going to have? What's that you want your employees to have? What's the experience that you want then to be able to provide to your customers or your vendors, et cetera? Having these extremely broad terms like, empowering, et cetera, painted on the wall of your office a corridor or in a conference room or something, that doesn't really help the organization because number one, if you got 10 people in the room to ask them, what does that mean? You'll probably get about 11 or 12 different opinions.
Different answers, yeah. So once you've defined your culture, what's the next step?
Yeah. So the next step is then to create a strategy to move you from where you are today to that desired culture. And this is also very challenging to folks because while they're used to developing business strategies to achieve other goals within their organization, most people challenge with identifying the framework around which you develop that strategy. In order to develop any strategy, you have to have some sort of framework.
Yeah.
So this really is what I spent most of the last 25 years or so refining and developing, and I continue to refine it today as I work with organizations. But it's that framework. So the framework revolves around purpose, the leader, people, process, and communication. So what I do is we walk through together with the leadership team, and then they executives will then bring that back to their company and discuss it throughout their, throughout the organization is, okay, what is our purpose? And that purpose has to be something that's inspirational.
Yeah.
It can't just be, well, our purpose is to, provide X percent return on investment to our shareholders every quarter. That's not something that is going to get someone out of bed in the morning and say, man, I can't wait to go in and do that. And I think that most businesses, most organizations, they have a compelling purpose. If you dig down deep enough, someone went to great pains to create that organization to solve a problem, solve somebody's problem. And I've got a friend of mine who is the CEO of a company that makes rotary brushes. So think of big brushes you'd see on street cleaners, or that would, you see them on front of large pieces of equipment that clear runways and those types of things of debris. Not a very sexy product, if you will, not something that you think you can really get your head around.
Excited about.
Yeah, exactly. But what he did is he identified that by asking the question why, once he joined the company, and he's fairly recent, okay, so why are we doing this? Okay, why? What he really came up with is the purpose of that company isn't to make brushes. The purpose of that company is to help people arrive home safely back to their families. And isn't that what most people want to do at the end of the day?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's got a real pull, hasn't it? You can, you can line up behind that and go with it, put in that extra mile. It's a bit more exciting.
Absolutely. And so that's really critical, is developing that inspirational purpose.
Yeah.
But then we talked about the leader, and you may have noticed that it's the only element of the strategy that has an article in front of it, the leader. And that's very purposeful, because while it's not just the leader who's responsible for identifying the culture that the organization wants to build, or implementing and driving that culture, they are the key person to do that.
Yeah.
And if the leader isn't on board, if they're not bought into this vision of the culture that the company's trying to move to, it's going to become very, very apparent. If they think of it as just sort of a nice to do thing that they're doing for appearances, they're not going to spend the time making sure that it's a top priority or the top priority in the company. They're not going to make sure that it has the appropriate resources to accomplish those aims. And like most most areas of leadership, people will see right. People will see right through that. And clearly, if the leader isn't bought into it, then you're not going to be able to bring other people along because they're just not going to be on board. And so that's really identifying, what are the behaviors of the leader
Mm.
that are necessary in order to drive that culture.
So just,
People,
just
go ahead,
sorry,
please.
I was just going to say, just what sort of behavior do you think are important for a leader
Yeah.
to demonstrate?
No, absolutely. It is somewhat dependent to some degree on the kind of culture that they're trying to build. But in general, what you're looking for is behaviors that support building that type of culture. So if part of your culture is making sure that your employees, uh, are able to grow, within their position, within their company, and you as the leader don't support them when they've planned to, uh, say, perhaps go to a conference for a week, or a course of study, those types of things, because in the meantime something popped up. Well, guess
Yeah,
what? Something's always going to pop up, and it's up to that leader to reinforce those behaviors, say, no, 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 we said this is important, even though we've got a big project that's going on and that's critical, you're still going to go. And I tell
yeah,
you, that goes a long way because
yeah,
people are going to see that and they're going to say, wow, you know what? Even though we've got this big order that came in or this big project that we're working on, the president, the CEO, whoever the leader is, they still supported. They told that individual they could go. This was
and they
something
followed
that was
through with it.
unforeseen that came up, and they followed through. They
Yeah,
followed through, and that's one example.
yeah,
If if being fiscally responsible and um, is something that is going to move your company's culture from where it is today to where it wants to be. Again, what are those leaders behaviors?
they
When
can't
they,
be
tra-
irresponsible.
when they, tr- for instance, when they travel, do they take people with them that perhaps that are unnecessary just to kind of make their travel easier? How are they traveling?
Yeah,
Um, could they, do they really need to fly? Could they take the train instead? Um, what kind of accommodations do they stay in? Those types of things. So again, this, the leader is going to be under a tremendous amount of scrutiny. And oh, by the way, if you're a leader, you've signed up for that, and you need to
yeah,
understand that. But again, what you could do is by exhibiting those behaviors that support building that culture that you've described, then guess what? When somebody's, could be something as simple as, you're expanding and you're buying new office furniture. Well, buy a desk that's a couple $100. You can buy a desk that's a couple $1,000. What kind of, you know, what kind of discipline, if you will, are
yeah,
you
yeah,
instilling in your folks? And if people see, oh well, when the boss travels, she always, stays sort of a mid-level accommodation and takes the most economical means of travel to get there. People are going to say, oh, you know what, I can do with this $800 desk instead of the $8,000 desk.
yeah, yeah. So we've got obviously the purpose. We've talked a little bit there about the leader and the behaviors and why that's important. What's the third step?
Yeah. So the third element of developing that strategy is looking at your people and making sure that the people are aligned with that culture you're trying to develop. Do you have the right
Yeah,
people in the organization? What should the organization expect from the people in the organization to help achieve that strategy? What kinds of behaviors should they expect from everyone in the organization? And oh, by the way, likewise, what should the people in the organization expect from the company?
Yeah.
It's always a two-way street. And we could sort of rehash that example of going to a conference. So, again, if you're supporting developing individuals and leaders within the organization, that's something that your people ought to expect. They ought to expect that their supervisors, their leadership are coaching them, that are identifying, that are talking to them and saying, asking them, what do you aspire to do? What is it you want to do, either within this organization or maybe even outside of that organization? Right. And help them, and then help them determine, how do they get there? What skills do they need in order to achieve that next level? And, the employee ought to expect that, again, that their leader is going to coach them and help get them there. Those are some of the areas in people. And, you can go to you go to Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and he talks about getting the right people in the right seats. I think most people are understand that, but I try to look at, a level below that, and really think from an individual working in this organization that says they want to build this culture. What should I expect from the company? What support should I expect from the company? And then the fourth element of developing that strategy is our processes. And a lot of people, when I start talking about that, they'll say, "Oh, well, hold on. We're not a manufacturer. We're not, well, every organization has processes. It's simply, how does the work get done?" And to me, one of the most telling aspects of, or indicators rather, of what a company's actual culture is exactly that: is how does the work get done? Is the leadership saying that we want to ensure that we push decision-making capability to the lowest levels and really give people the power and the authority to make decisions without so that they can do it more quickly, instead of having, constantly elevating decisions to the next higher level, which just takes more and more time. If you say that, and then I go and I talk to people that are, one of their ancillary duties is ensuring that their part of the organization has all the office supplies, for instance, that they need. And you go and you talk to them and they show you the requisition form and, the signature block for their supervisor. And then the signature block below that for their supervisor, to get a couple cases of printer paper and some pens. Obviously that's, the message isn't getting down to where the work's actually getting done. And one of the most important processes, and I think this is an area that almost every organization can work on, is decision making. How are decisions made in that organization? If you go into an organization and you ask anyone at any level, it might be, your very first line individual who interacts with your customer. It might be a division head, et cetera. If you ask them, what decisions are you authorized to make and what decisions are you not authorized to make?
Yeah.
I think you'd be surprised.
If they can give you the answer.
Exactly. And it's something that a lot of organizations don't really think about. But when you talk about, particularly in today's environment of having to move very quickly and make decisions quickly, people need to understand that. And I tell you, I spent over 31 years in the Army, and the U.S. Army is one of the biggest violators of that.
Yeah.
Now down at the lower tactical levels, it's very clear.
Yeah.
who has what decision-making authorities. But when you get up more to the corporate level of the Army, and, the U.S. Army's, over 1 million people and 75 billion dollar a year operation. It's amazing the decisions that people will push to the highest level, the Secretary of the Army, the Chief of Staff of the Army. When you have a topic at a 4-star conference where the Army several times a year gets all of their 4 stars together, and one of those topics is whether or not a soldier who's in their physical training uniform inside a gymnasium, lifting weights, whether they can wear earbuds or not. To me, that's a very easy first line or second line supervisor decision to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. You think about the incredibly onerous problems that those leaders have to deal with, and this is the type of thing that people are spending time on. So that's critically important. Is, do your processes align with the culture that you're trying to build? And those that don't, what are you doing about it? And, how do you redesign those processes?
Yeah.
That's really the process piece. And then the last piece, last element of the strategy is communication. And I'm not just talking about how do you communicate what it is you're trying to achieve as a culture, but how does the function of communication within your organization support that culture that you're trying to build? And communication has to be purposeful. You have to think it through. So I'll give you an example. Very tied to the last topic that we discussed was decision making. Have you thought out, as either the CEO or the leadership team and the supervisory levels of the throughout the entire organization, who communicates what to whom, how?
Yeah.
So what are the things that the CEO or executive director says, oh, okay, I'm the only person that's going to communicate this either internally or externally within the organization? And, what are the things that, as they come up, you want other people in the organization to take charge with communicating, and how do you do it? Very famously or infamously, I guess is probably the right term, during COVID, there was a company, and I'm trying to recall its name, where the CEO got on a Zoom call and fired 800 people over a Zoom call, group Zoom call, not it wasn't like these individuals, first line supervisors,
Yeah.
got on a Zoom call because they were working remotely at the time, got on and discussed this with them. But the CEO got on,
And actually made that decision.
Right. Said, hey, we're having to downsize and you guys are all
good. Yeah.
Not I don't think an ideal way of doing that. I'm sure that CEO he had a opportunity to reconsider how he did that. He would probably now come up with some other means to do that. And in his defense, I can understand how he might have been thinking, well, it's my decision that this is how we're going to reduce costs. So it's incumbent upon me to tell everyone. Well,
Tell everyone. Yeah.
I can see that, but just sort of think about how does that work?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Stuart, I'll try to find a link to the video and send it to you, but it's just amazing. You've got the Zoom screen with
they got all these people on it,
30 faces, and imagine how many pages of that they had. And when he made that announcement, everyone's like in shock.
I can imagine. Yeah. That's a really, pivotal moment, isn't it?
Right. So again, have you set up the means by which people can communicate easily to support the type of culture you're trying to build?
So are you talking there about a sort of key message framework and a cascade and
Yeah, that and there's other techniques, having town halls,
yeah,
those types of activities, having um, chat groups within the organization that maybe go beyond a specific project. It might be about a topic. You might have a chat group about uh, vacation time,
yeah, yeah.
taking time off, medical leave, those types of things, where you can get people's ideas and you have a way for them to very clearly and easily communicate those ideas.
Input to the process. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, certainly some feedback I've had is regular communication, coming back to your initial point, with a purpose and an
Yes.
outcome is really, really valuable for everybody because it helps people to feel part of the process. And when it's damaging is when there isn't communication, because lots of things come into play then, assumptions and concerns, and people come up with a different narrative that might be completely removed from where the actual true picture is. And it's very dangerous, that, and often it can be evident of a sort of toxic culture that might be coming into play, or a disconnect between the leader and the next level down and onwards, really.
No, no, absolutely. And it shows in various ways. It might be, for instance, at a town hall, someone might come up and say, "Hey, what's the status of A, B, or C? We've been talking about it on the chat channel, and have you looked at it?" Well, again, that's something that the leadership has to make part of their communication plan, that they're not only providing those channels, but they're actually actively monitoring them
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and participating, saying, "Hey, there's been a lot of talk this last week about vacation time, and there's some people that would like to who would like to be able to donate their vacation time to somebody else in the company who's maybe has some sort of family crisis or something like that. Uh, you know, here's as the chief human resources officer, here's my initial thoughts on that.
yeah,
What does the group think?" And then coming back to this, okay, I understand, and I'm going to take this to the CEO. I'm going to take this to our next executive leadership team meeting, so that people again just don't think that that they're just there putting things out on the on the communication channel, and nobody's really monitoring or taking any action on it.
yeah.
You know,
And I guess wherever that goes, whether it gets a consensus decision and everyone's, brought into it, or actually for whatever reason it can't be a decision that's taken forward, people feel that they've input to the process, they've been listened to, and there's a rationale as to why perhaps certain decisions being made, which is going to again feed back to that whole culture piece and feeling
right.
part of it. And it's evident in the time and effort and the commitment that people have shown in trying to get to an outcome, which is really important, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And again, being able to have that communication feedback to
Mm,
the individuals, because again, there may be something that they didn't even think about,
yeah,
that is driving, how they do things or why they do things. There may be, depending upon where the company is, where they work, there might even be, a legal prohibition behind doing
yeah,
something that they'd want to do, and obviously that would take then uh, a different.
a different view.
Right, would be a right. That'd be a different issue, and a different method that would have to be addressed. So those are really, again, those are the 5 elements of the strategy:
Yeah,
purpose, the leader, people, process, and communications. And again, that's the framework around which you can develop that strategy before you take the third step, which is implementing that strategy.
mm,
And, this is where most strategies go to die. Um, I can't tell you how many strategies I've seen, either in my military career or now working in industry, where there's all this effort, all this energy put into developing this strategy, and gets put together, and the leader signs off on it. It might even be briefed, will probably be briefed to the board of directors, depending upon how the company is organized. And it's it's put in a binder, or it's, printed glossy, there's a glossy document, and then it just gets put on the shelf.
Nothing happens.
Right,
Too,
right.
too. It's too complicated. It's too complex for people to get.
Oftentimes that's the case, but I think more often is a hit is the leadership then supporting the execution of the implementation of that strategy.
Yeah.
And, not just sort of, patting themselves on the back saying, "Hey, we developed this great strategy," but really saying, "Okay, now how do we, how do we do it? How do we
Make it
make
work.
this part of, everything that we do in our organization?" And, so this now it requires you to look at every policy that you have, every process, procedure that you have in the organization, to make sure that the way you're doing it, and the methods behind that support moving towards that culture that you described as your first step. This is the kind of culture we want to build. Identifying, what other programs you need to take a look at. If you've communicated in your strategy that individual development is important in your organization. So, so what are you doing about it? It's one thing to say it, but what types of programs and policies are you putting in place to support that? How are you, again, then you've got to be able to communicate that to everybody. And so that's really, really the hard part.
That's
Gary
the hard
Ridge,
work, isn't it?
yes, absolutely. Gary Ridge, who's the chairman emeritus of WD-40, which I imagine is one of the more recognizable brands around the globe.
Yeah.
People see that can and they know what it is.
Yeah.
He told me, and he says quite often, that building great culture is simple, but it's not easy, and time isn't on your side. So this implementation phase. This is really where you're getting into, creating or taking purposeful action to achieve the objectives of that strategy. And this is the hard work, and it's really unending. There's no end to it, because again, everything that you do in the organization drives that culture. Everything from, what are your hiring policies? How do you go about recruiting new employees? Do you have all of the position or job descriptions within your organization? Do they reflect that culture that you're trying to build, and what you expect from individuals in order to support that strategy? And so again, this is really where, whatever,
This is the tough thing.
right, where the rubber meets the road, or whatever
Yeah.
expression you want to say. This is where this is where everything gets real. This is where it gets hard and gets real, and you won't know whether you're making progress moving towards that desired culture unless you execute the fourth step of the process, which is measuring progress.
Yeah.
So, how do you do that? What are the indicators? Some of the data is going to be more objective than other elements of the data. Some are going to be more subjective. But how do you go about doing that? How do you make sure that one, you're measuring the right things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you can measure, and most of them aren't going to make a difference when it comes to developing great culture. But clearly identifying those things that you're looking at, having a process to do that, some sort of governance body, whether it's one that's currently existing or whether it's something like in the earlier days of Southwest Airlines when Herb Kelleher was the CEO and they had a culture board,
Yeah.
and it included uh, not just the CEO, because again, he knew that his priorities and what he supports, the biggest indicator of that is where he spends his time.
Yeah.
And so, he believed that their culture was the most important thing to develop. And so he sat on that culture board, and they had people all throughout the organization. It wasn't just the very senior leadership, all, you know,
It's a good spread across the
talking,
organization.
kind of talking to themselves, but making sure that there were people, throughout not across the breadth of functions, but as well as down through the
The
levels of
different levels.
right,
Yeah.
the different levels of the organization. But it's absolutely critical. And when you think about it, if there was a company that said on the 1st of January, okay, one of our goals this year is to increase our revenue by 25%. Number one, you can guarantee that they have all of their metrics in place and how they're going to measure that. They're going to be measuring it on a regular basis. They're going to be reporting it on a regular basis. And the same thing has to hold true for your culture. It can't just you can't just set it aside and think that it's going to run
Nothing on its
autonomously.
own.
Right. It's going to, if you don't closely manage your organizational culture, you'll still have a culture, but you're probably not going to like it. It's almost going to be impossible for it to be that culture that you describe that you want to have. So, back to the revenue example, I couldn't imagine an instance where you set this goal as a organization on the 1st of January, and then on the 28th of January, the CEO goes to talks to the CFO. So how are we doing on that? That's the first time they've talked about it in almost a year. It's something that's going to be continuously reviewed. It's going to be continuously monitored. And so the same thing is true for your culture. If you really want to get to that desired culture, it's an active process.
Mm.
And it's a very rewarding process because, not only are you going to achieve that objective of building that strategy, or excuse me, building that culture that you're trying to achieve, but yeah, again, every study that I've seen points to the fact that your company, every objective means that you have of measuring the success of your company is going to be markedly improved. Again, whether
Yeah.
I talked about earlier, but whether it's uh, earnings per share, whether it's profitability, whether it's innovation, who delivers that for the company? It's the people,
It's the
and they do
people.
it
Yeah. And if
right, and they do it within living and working in that culture that you've developed, that you've nurtured, that you continue to work on through that company. If you want something to be innovative, guess what? You need to have a culture that
which
supports
is
that.
innovative. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
You've got to, whether it's provide, and there's multiple ways of doing it. It's whether it's providing time for those people to exclusively work on that. If it's to have, some other incentive system to do that. So that's really, critical and really my biggest takeaway. You
Yeah.
talked about, hey, is there a takeaway? To me, the biggest takeaway is if you want to create a specific culture, great culture in your organization, you have to be purposeful about it.
Yeah.
Just like anything else in your company or in your organization. And sometimes that I'll be quite frank with you, that sometimes can frustrate
Yeah.
people in the organization. It's like, hey, I always hear my leadership talk about culture and how important culture is to us, but in the big scheme of things, I really don't see the commitment. I don't see things being done, things being put in place uh, in order to support that.
Yeah.
And they don't always need to be, you don't have to start off with some sort of grandiose, 100%
Maybe small step.
re-engineering of everything about your company. It can start with a suggestion box.
Yeah.
It can start with, regular town halls where everybody in the organization can see, and the leadership can reinforce, what is it we're trying to do as a company? What are we trying to achieve so that those people that are there on the front lines, if you will, making it happen, they can see their place in that. They
Yeah.
can they can tie what they're doing to, not only the mission of the organization, but really the purpose that we talked
The
about earlier.
purpose of, yeah. Yeah.
But you absolutely have to be intentional about it,
Yeah.
which
And you've
means you
got to
have
follow through.
Yep, absolutely. One of the first things you can possibly do in an organization is, people love to send surveys out. Um, but one of the worst things you can do is send a survey out, and those folks that actually took the time to answer the survey, if you're lucky, it's probably about a third of your people. Um, they will probably highlight some issues that they have. And one of the worst things you can do is send that survey out, but then not follow up.
Yeah.
And at a town hall or however you want to do it, say, hey, we sent the survey out. Here are here are the results. Here are the main themes that came out of that. So now people feel heard,
Yeah.
or at least they feel like you've listened to them.
You've listened to them. Yeah.
Right. You've listened to them, but then you say, okay, well, here's what we're doing about these three things. Number one,
Yeah.
absolutely, we agree. We're going to implement. Number two, we're going to implement, but it's going to take us about a year. And here's who's going to work on it. And oh, by the way, we'll provide you with quarterly updates or semi-annual updates at these town halls, so people can see that you're following through. And the third one might be, hey, that's something we got to look at some more. So, we'll work through that through, one specific channel or a couple different ways of doing that. And here's how you can continue to
Support that or input to that process. Yeah.
participate in that.
Yeah.
So again, now they've not only feel like you've listened to them, but they've actually been heard.
Yeah. And actually part of the process. And I guess the small steps is there's lots of small steps that we can take
Yes.
as a leader where you can follow that process that you've just talked about there and quickly get people from a position where they might be frustrated to think that actually we're in the same place, and actually now there's a responsibility. We're all working as a collective to make it better. We're going towards a direction or a shared sort of goal, which is very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm just conscious of time, David, and there's a lot there that you've shared, which is really wonderful. So, very big thanks for that. And I know you talked about, intent there, and if there was one step for anyone listening, what would you suggest they do? If it's a question or an actual action that they do that they could do quickly on the back of this podcast, what would you suggest it be?
I think if there's one thing and one action that you're going to take is it helps you to start to get after that first step in building the right culture is defining that culture you're trying to build.
Yeah.
Simply go out and ask people, how would you like this company to be? What kind of atmosphere would you like to come in and work every day
Yeah.
that would inspire you, that would motivate you, that would tie you to, participating in something bigger than yourself, and but also be feeling appreciated for for what you do, and um, have the ability to learn something, to grow. How would that, what would that look like? And really start there and just ask people, what they would want, what they would like.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think you'd be surprised, in what you get. A work environment for a CEO and for the C-suite or other senior leadership is significantly different than the environment within a a frontline employee works, whether
Yeah.
it's in manufacturing, whether it's whether it's in sales in a B2C company or a B2B company. It's very, very different, and there's some things that are important to people at that level that may not be important to the people at the higher level. So I think it's really critical that you look all the way, not only across your organization, but down
Yeah,
through
but
your organization.
through the different levels. Great. That's wonderful. And that's a really good start point for everyone on the back of this call. Take it away and really think about how we can put that question out to the people and help them to become part of the fabric of the organization. Um, so David, I will share your details. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you or ask the question about your book, I mean, just quickly, where can we get a copy of your book? Where do we need to go to
Yes,
to find it?
yeah. So you could find Conquer Your Culture on Amazon,
Yeah.
and if you'd be so kind, Stuart, if you don't have the
Put your
link, I'll send you
details
the
in.
link to put in the show
Yeah.
notes, so people could find it very easily. But if you search Conquer Your Culture, you should see it come up. You could add my name, David Komar, and you'll definitely be able to find it. And again, one of the things I just want to briefly talk about the book is, number one is I wanted to make sure that I read a book that an executive could read on one domestic plane flight. Um, so a couple hours,
Yeah.
certainly in a couple hours, you can read this book. The other thing I didn't want to do is write a book that, like so many books I've read, you read it, you're like, there's a lot of good ideas in there I can implement. And then you put the book up on the bookshelf. So starting with chapter 2, every chapter has a section in it's called Take Action. And that Take Action section has 3 thought questions
Yeah.
and then 3 specific actions to take. And you also see in the book, there's a link you can go to get the companion workbook for free that allows you to record really what you're asked to do in the take action steps. So when you finish the book, you have a virtual blueprint of how to build the culture you want in your organization,
In your
whether you're the
organization.
CEO or whether you're, the leader of a smaller organization. So again, I tried to make it a very practical book. Um, you know, I'm not going to match what John Maxwell has said in the 80 books or whatever it is he's written, certainly. So there was no reason to sort of rehash that. But if you want to know actually how to do it, how to
How to
build
do
great
it.
culture, that's why I wrote the book. And I think you'll find it useful.
That's fantastic. So this is a real how-to guide of, and as you say, some practical steps in there, like a guide of how to do it and a framework in which to go and put that into practice. So that's really been wonderful, David. I really appreciate your time today. There's a lot there that for all of us to to go and think about, and those 5 steps that you talked about that they underpin and provide a really strong framework to go and start working with quickly. I will share your details at the end. Obviously, I'll put the link in there for your book. Any questions that come through, I'll forward on to you. Equally, if there's anyone listening who's got any questions for me about coaching, any support that they might be interested in getting from me, and also to register for future podcasts, then please get in touch with me. But thank you to everyone who's listened today. Thank you again, David. Really appreciate your time. There's some great insight there. We'll look forward to the next podcast that we have soon. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership and Lead podcast. I hope you found value in today's conversation and are inspired to take action on your own journey. To dive deeper, I invite you to complete the Leadership Self-Assessment. This is a powerful tool designed to help you gain insight into your strengths, identify areas for growth, and take the next step in your personal and professional development. You can access the assessment directly by scanning the QR code on the screen or visiting stellacoach.co.uk/self-assessment. And don't forget to follow our guests. You'll find their contact information below to learn more about their work and insights. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the Leadership and Lead podcast for more inspiring conversation. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode as we continue to unleash your potential.